And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sia. Yeah, I do the writing of this report. But of course it relies entirely on two things. One is the team of Sia and the wider festival who are working, you know, with the TV and film content all year and go everywhere and talk to everyone and hear everything. If you have ever had a conversation with Sia about anything, it's quite possible that some little nugget of that has entered this whole process. The other thing that I do want to say is that we are working with public funding, and I'm not going to talk this year about public funding, and that's just why I want to say that again, this is another example of what a luxury it is that we're working in a country or in countries where it's possible to create these rooms where we can zoom out a little bit and look at big picture questions. So yes, the Nostradamus report, as many of you will know by now, is an annual publication and a series of seminars where we look at the near future of the screen industries, 3 to 5 years ahead. I don't actually predict the future, although history, no, I mean, obviously we've done more than one 5-year cycle, so now we can say that we're actually pretty good at describing the future. And the way we cheat is that we're speaking to people in strategic positions who are already creating that future in their work. This year, our 10 interviewees are these magnificent people. Not very many of them are in the room this time. Berenice, we will meet later. But it's been an absolute joy to speak to all of these very, very smart people. They come from the UK, France, Sweden, Finland, Norway, and Brazil this year and are representing broadcasters, production, exhibition, VOD streaming, VOD aggregation, sales, public film funding, and industry analysis. And the 7 topics of this year include moving forward with diversity, which we're going to delve deeper into later in the session, the landscape after streaming, the creative renaissance of feature film, and how that might play out in the rapidly polarizing theatrical marketplace. We're going to talk about the window system again, even in this talk. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go back to that. We're going to talk about some of the challenges that stem from this explosion in demand, and about some possible solutions, and also about some broader changes in the audiovisual landscape on the technical side as well as on the user side. And obviously, I will not have time for all of this today, but you will receive a copy. Ooh, this is the first time I'm touching one. You will receive a copy of this report as you leave, and the free download will be available at the close of business today. And before we go to the future, as I often like to do, we will go to the past, but not all that far to the past. I think this picture dates me pretty precisely. Whether your life was changed by Richard Linklater's Slacker or Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs, by Wayne Wang or Paul Thomas Anderson, or Cameron Crowe or Larry Clark, or Alison Anders, or Gus Van Sant, or Kevin Smith, or by the Brazilian film revival, or by Lars von Trier and the Dogma 95 movement, by Genet and Caron, by Trainspotting, by Lola Rent, by the international careers of Kieslowski and Kaurismäki. There was a period not that long ago when cinema was necessary for life. And I think that is the reason why very many of us are in this room today at all. We've chosen to work in this field because we happen to be exposed to an artistic revolution at an age when we were very open to new suggestions, and when new ways of telling stories about reality were very, very important to us. But that's only one of the backstories, of course, of the industry as it looks today, although then we couldn't make the connection. 3 months from now, it will be 30 years since this moment as well. And in some ways, that is the moment, this is the birth of the industry as we know it today. And it happened on American network television, I think on ABC, believe it or not. So in retrospect, all of the elements of what we're doing now were already there. We have an art house auteur given space for an uncompromising vision. We have storytelling centered on a community, a very interesting world that you want to spend time in, even when sometimes the narrative outcomes are incoherent. There's a big cast, there's a distinct visual style, there's an absolute refusal to tell a straightforward story. There are genre elements, and even though all of this was really weird, it spawned a global obsession. I also like this particular picture because you have Audrey Horne and Agent Cooper sort of looking to the light of the future there. Cable television, and of course in particular early on HBO, picked up that baton of changing how we told stories in TV. And then SVOD streaming accelerated that development exponentially because of a bunch of reasons. But the main one, of course, was that they were liberated from the demands and the annual production schedules that the advertising finance model for television required. And a weird thing happened, which is that normally in cinema, we've gotten a new wave, like a new revolution of cinema every 20 years. We got literally a new wave in the 50s. We got a new wave in Hollywood in the 70s and so on. And then, of course, in the 90s, as I said before. And that means that by now we're a little bit overdue. And there are reasons for that. The financial crisis in 2001 and 2008 really hit the risk willingness of the feature film market, and the rapid crash of DVD sales in that, so at approximately the same time, of course, also affected that. People got really scared or wary about taking risks artistically also and changing things, and we wanted to stick to stuff that worked in feature film, and that did make creative space smaller, and something happened where feature film, theatrically released somehow lost contact or touch with the audience a little bit. It felt a little bit, especially I would want to say for the last 10 years, it's felt a little bit not modern, not contemporary. And part of that, of course, is that it remained very white and very male, but it's also about the tone. And meanwhile, you know, we've seen, while we were watching television, there was significantly more diversity, both behind and front of the camera. This wasn't great, but you know, it was much better than in feature film. And also, the status of the writer was rising exponentially in television and remaining lower in the feature film space. People didn't stop going to the movies in this period, but they did stop, I want to say, they did stop caring about movies, reserving, we as viewers, also we, I think, as viewers, if we're honest with ourselves, we kind of reserved our real passion for a medium that wanted to treat us and our intelligence with respect, which television did. And now the TV drama boom, and in particular the streamers, have changed filmmaking broadly in a bunch of really interesting and important ways. One, of course, is that in the last few years we've seen streamers just give bags of money to arthouse filmmakers and say, do something great. And then sometimes, you know, left to their own devices, filmmakers with budgets will make great things. The audience has been trained by serial drama to follow and enjoy incredibly complicated storytelling. Subtitles have been normalized. We always mention Netflix in this context, and we say, but it's about their business strategy. All of the, they're teaching the Americans to read subtitles with Narcos and so on, and all of that, of course, is true. But also, in your Facebook feed every day, there's a video with the sound off, which has subtitles on it. So gradually, they are training at least 1 billion just Facebook even is training 1 billion of people in the world to read subtitles. So that's normalizing and becoming no big deal, which is great if you come from a small language area. The status of the writers has really been rising, of course, and the streamers in particular have experimented with different ways of bringing films to the audience. Because to the streamers, as to the audiences at large, the heart of audiovisual storytelling is the living room screen. And I mean, I'm really earnest when I say that I think that's true for most of the audiences, possibly even for most of us. The heart is in the living room. The temple of cinema might still be theatrical, right? But when we stopped being religious about going to the movies, it also then means that we stop being religious. That's not the church we go to for salvation, right? So now I'm going to give you the come to Jesus moment of this talk, which is that Arthouse is back. We are at a moment now when that overdue explosion has finally happened. And part of that, of course, is because the streaming industry and I'm sorry, I'm just going to move a little bit over here because I'm being blinded by that light. Yeah, so as you all know, TV and film industry is just one industry now. So of course you can't have an enormous positive development in one without also eventually having it in the other. And Berenice talks in the report about the genre that she calls elevated art house. I love it. There are also other observations that I might be able to summarize in this way. The new wave of really exciting cinema that audiences are really getting psyched about as well is aesthetically elevated. There's very strong mise-en-scène. It has very strong narratives. It's short, which is to say it's feature length, which in the logic of contemporary audiovisual storytelling is a short format now. But even though it's short, it's deep, because it still has to be as intelligent and as complex and as worked through as a longer TV series needs to be. And really importantly, cinema now is visceral, which means you feel something in your body when you watch it. I saw Uncut Gems here at the festival last week, and it was just as insane an experience as they say. It is made for Netflix, so it's made for the living room. But this whole film is about holding your breath for 2.5 hours because it's super intense. And it's really, and literally at Draken you could hear people suddenly say like, in the room because they had literally forgotten to breathe. That's how exciting this movie is. So these things that we're saying, and also, Adam Sandler, career best performance. It's insane that he hasn't been recognized more for it. And you all have to see it. And ultimately, of course, this means you're all going to see it on Netflix and just suck it up. That's the way it's going to be. So we've been saying, what's going to drive? What makes it worth going to the theater? And then say, it's blockbusters. That's what audiences think it's worth going to the cinema for. Yeah, I don't think it's that simple. Some things are just better with a big picture. And then suddenly the art house elements of visually specific things are becoming incredibly important as well. Now, the 90s film revolution, I think probably every film revolution is about relevance. But in the 90s, what that revolution was a lot about filmmaking technology becoming available to a lot of people, and who didn't actually know how to tell visual stories necessarily. So there was a lot of talking head cinema. We're not going to see a lot of talking head cinema in the theaters anymore. That's not how this is going to be. But it's still true that you have to tell stories that are true and unfamiliar. Plus, you need that visual aesthetic. Plus, you need the physicality of the theatrical experience. And that doesn't mean necessarily that it has to be high-paced, and this is like a ridiculously extreme example of that. It can also be a comedy that just makes you laugh until you almost wet yourself. That's also a physical experience. And of course, horror, as we know, is working really well still in theatrical. Now, I'm saying there's a new wave of filmmakers. That doesn't mean necessarily that they're all young. In fact, a lot of them are older because there just hasn't been, like between von Trier and Tarantino, there is not a big space to like squeeze into. Bong Joon-ho, for instance, of course, is not a very young man. But still, I'm rooting for Parasite for Best Picture next week, but if it doesn't win, probably 1917 will win. And even though Mendes belongs to an earlier cinematic generation, that film actually is also pretty much following this same formula. So now we can deduce that viewing behaviors are splitting not so much along format and platform, which is how we think about this. It's the long commitment and the short commitment. It's the high risk and the low risk. So a long commitment would be the Marvel Cinematic Universe or 7 seasons of a TV show. That's a long commitment. And the short commitment in your living room, an hour, an evening, on your phone, 5 seconds, 20 seconds, right? Then the high risk, the highest risk probably is watching an unknown work by unknown creators. And the lowest risk is when you know what you're going to get, so blockbuster essentially, or rewatching something you've seen before. If you watch Friends for the 10th time or the billionth time, or you watch a movie, just think about how many times you've seen your favorite movies. That's, in a way, the lowest risk investment. That's a personal blockbuster. In this spring in Variety, the IMAX CEO, who's called Richard Gelfand, he gave an interview for their podcast that I haven't been able to stop thinking about this year. He says, well, I'm not in the movie business, I'm in the blockbuster business. And what he means by that is that their business model is that they're only going to show blockbuster movies and they're only going to show them for maybe 2 weeks. That's what IMAX does. So in a way, it's sort of the most extreme version of that sort of mainstream commercial multiplex that, of course, they're also often physically collaborating with or in business with. And we've been writing in previous reports about the polarization of exhibition, and this clearly continues. So going to the cinema is doing really well because that's an experience business, and all of the physical experience businesses are doing well, as we know. But they're different experiences. So going to an art house cinema is very much about a social event, and it's has to be about a comfortable experience, but it's not necessarily a high-tech experience. And then, of course, we have in the multiplex increasingly, the shaking stare and the impressive sound and all of these things. So those are also event spaces, but the events is not so much about meeting another human or being in an artwork. It's about being in the ride of the film. And that makes the value proposition incredibly different between these two. Blockbusters are about meeting a specific expectation. There's a big promise, we're going to give you this specific thing on this specific date. That's when you're going to want it, that's when you're going to get it, and then you have to deliver. When you don't deliver, you lose astronomical amounts of money. And then the art house space is more about exploration, about the joy of feeling that I have personally found a gem that people didn't know about. Of course, people know about because somebody told me to see that as well, but it feels to me like I have found a secret. Or even more, because of course we know that advertising rarely gets to us. Now it's recommendations from friends. If I'm going to see an art house film that a friend, or an independent film that a friend has recommended, then I am performing an act of community, even when I'm not seeing it with them. I'm definitely kind of seeing it with them, and we're going to talk about it afterwards. And it's a way for us to build that identity and that community together. And clearly there is room in the market for both. If we think about the music industry, we have stadium tours and we have club gigs. And those are not in any way in conflict with each other. But they have very different marketing, they have very different release strategies, and so on. And very often they have the same fans on different days. Sometimes I will pay 900-something crowns to see a stadium tour. But more often I will pay 200, 300, 400 and go see somebody at a club. Now, I want to say something really important. Blockbuster movies are often dismissed as artistically weak or derivative in content, and I know that was true in the 80s, but it's been some time since, and the audience is not stupid. I mean, I don't become less stupid on the days I put my Spider-Man t-shirt on and go and watch an MCU movie. The quality of the content really matters, both in the blockbuster industry and the cinema industry, which are now different industries, right? And this is why people like Ryan Coogler and Patty Jenkins are the best-selling directors in the world. That's who made the films that really break through, even in the sense of the blockbuster. And there's another thing that I want to say here. Disney, and specifically this team of Jennifer Lee and Chris Buck, they kind of messed up on Frozen 1 on representation of indigenous communities. So before Frozen 2, they collaborated with a group of indigenous experts, known as the Verdet, which was comprised of representatives from several indigenous Sami groups, including the International Sami Film Institute. And the parties, being the Walt Disney Corporation and the Sami communities here in the Nordics, wrote literally a contract, which is pretty much unheard of between a major corporation and an indigenous community. And there's some actual contract which we're not allowed to see, but there's also a ceremonial contract. And here you can look at some images, a picture of some of the ceremonial contract. It defines Sami traditions and arts as the property of the Sami nation. And the most important words on this slide are, down there, ensuring adequate benefit sharing, which in this case, the key benefit sharing here was that a dub of this blockbuster film was provided in one of the Sami languages, which there's no market logic for, but there's plenty of cultural logic for doing that, and it's very helpful for all kinds of reasons to that community. And Disney has also done similar things for other communities around Moana, for instance. And I mention this example because it shows us that diversity and representation, even on the level of global justice when relative to indigenous communities, this is not a niche concern. This is now a market necessity. There is no way that Disney would put this effort in if they didn't actually have to. Feature film, so then, is probably drifting towards being two different media, but many of the concerns are the same with the smallest film and the biggest film, and we all need to work on solving those together. And I know I just said two media, but maybe it's possibly even at least three different media with different purposes and consumption purposes and different release patterns. The question is Scorsese's Irishman a movie or not? I mean, we already had this conversation about Roma last year, but it's much more, it's much less clear because this movie is so goddamn long. And it also challenges, and you can read more about how it's worked in theaters in the report. And I feel like I've spoken about holdback windowing every year since the beginning, and indeed in 2014 we optimistically predicted that there would be significant changes to the window system within 3 to 5 years. And every year since then I've been so embarrassed that we got that wrong. But the weird thing is that now it's been 5 years, or 6 years even. And the change is really happening now. What is normal is very different when it comes to releasing them 5 years ago. And these challenges have happened, and it's not just Netflix and Amazon, so or the renaissance of platform releasing, which is a whole other topic we could talk about for an hour. But in South Korea, for instance, there is a window, which is the super premium VOD window, which has been in place since 2013, which means that 4 weeks after the theatrical premiere, the home entertainment window starts. 4 weeks, and the studios support this passionately because they are making a lot of money. In China, there's a mobile platform, it's relatively young, called Smart Cinema, where you can pay the box office price, basically, to watch a single stream to a single mobile device. You can't project it to another screen, you can't rewatch it, but you can pause it, so it's convenient in that way. So maybe you'll watch like 2 people on a date, but not more than that, unless you're in VR mode, because then you can watch the same stream of that movie in VR with 3 of your friends, or with the avatar representations of 3 of your friends. And you know, the first year and a half looks very promising on that, and they're testing in other markets as well. This is going to happen pretty fast. Does changing the window system cannibalize the cinema window? All of the studies have the same result, inconclusive. We do not know, which is a sign, because these are not bad studies, we're just asking the wrong questions. You can't find a definitive answer. It's going to be depending on the title. And we can't really do a good testing either, because of course if you release it one way, you didn't release it the other way, and the individual variation is too big, and we don't really understand our audiences at all, even though we like to think we do. But it definitely diminishes piracy, it definitely diminishes audience frustration, and it definitely helps your chances as a filmmaker or a rights holder to get the film seen while people actually remember it exists. But different films are optimized for different platforms, clearly. And some films are going to do really well in theaters and some are not. And we are at a point now where every film, as you all know, will have an individual release pattern. And 5 years from now, it's going to be completely normal. That said, within the wide landscape of individual releases, there are going to be some ways that are more normal than others. Also, yesterday at the TV drama, I mentioned this idea of the TV film. Like, do you remember TV films? That was a format that existed recently. These words mean nothing now. What is a TV film? Is this a TV film? Is a 90-minute procedural cop movie like a Beck film, is that a TV film? Yeah, I guess it is. If it isn't intended, so that's a TV show then. It's just that it's feature length. I mean, and here the audience is way ahead of us. So when this release came out, I found this on Twitter, a very helpful little diagram. If you want to watch The Irishman as a 4-episode miniseries, here's when this character says, when this thing happens, that's when you pause, then you reach the end of another episode. So somebody's done this work for you, very convenient. The audience is rapidly figuring out which kind of content belongs in which window, and we just need to learn from them, because ideally we'd be a step ahead of them on this. Right now we're behind. And this is vital, because there are broader challenges to the formats as we know them. Most important to say that younger viewers, so Jen said, is still about 25 and down, but that means 5 years from now they'll be 30. And by the way, if you're not working with this generation, you're screwed. They don't have any format loyalty like us old people do. And they don't really have a sense of format history either. So I'm just going to zoom out a little bit and think about what is the broader landscape of audiovisual storytelling where we live now, or where most people in the world live, except if you work in the film industry, which would make you constitutionally conservative and very invested in the old formats, right? So the first thing I want to show you is the terrifying paw of Dame Judi Dench. So yeah, now Åsa Garnert, who's an advisor on this project, that I had a really interesting conversation, like a small fight about this, because I said I think it's a really important breakthrough that when this film came out and they didn't have time to finish the effects and it was a disaster and they became a global, mocked all around the world, the studio decided to release a patched version, as it's called in software terms. They just sent a new version out to theaters with slightly better effects, where they had fixed this forgotten hand and some other things. And I said, to me this is new. And also says, oh, it's not new. You know, in the silent film age, films weren't stable at all. People had all kinds of cuts, and they would keep losing reels, and you could play any music you wanted in the theater and so on. Okay, yes, that's true, but that is also 100 years ago. But it's interesting, so we had at the beginning of the feature film format, it was kind of fluid and flexible, and the form, the shape of the thing wasn't holy at all. And then at the end, we are probably reaching some kind of end or shifting point of the feature film format, because now it's becoming increasingly unstable around the edges. What is a feature and what isn't? So yeah, you can release various edits. You could send a new edit out to theaters every week. There's no real, I mean, this is a download now, increasingly. So it's technically not even all that expensive, and if we decide that that's the direction we want to go and we build infrastructure for it, it could be basically free. Yeah, and when we have that, currently I don't think we can because of how the projectors work. But of course there's no reason for us not to have real-time interactive cinema. You could have like 17 versions or 125 versions of the same film, and depending on the audience reactions, which you can read with cameras from their faces, which we have the technology for, it's no big deal, you could just show every salon or every theater a different version of the film. Would that add to the rewatch value? Maybe. I mean, it would become expensive to produce, but not more expensive than Bandersnatch. And then what is a theatrical release suddenly? I don't even know, but this is possible today. And the question is somebody going to do something with this? Then we have the issue of the game engines, right? So this, what we're seeing here, is a real-time rendering of a game engine. I'm just going to turn off the sound. So this company sent a team to Iceland, where they did document textures and landscapes and surfaces and so on with cameras, and they put all this into the game engine and created this fictional world. And then I can just read from the press release from Unreal. With the Unreal Engine 4.25 at the heart of its real-time pipeline, Quixel's artists were able to iterate on the go, eliminating the need for pre-visualization or post-production. The team also built a physical camera rig that was able to capture movements in engine, that is to say inside the fiction, using virtual reality, adding an enhanced dimension of reality to the short, realism to the short. All of the post-processing and color grading was completed directly within the Unreal Engine. So yeah, this isn't film capturing of images. This is real-time rendering of images, which is very different. And this is what it looks like last year. 5 years from now is going to be basically like flawless photorealism. So it enables a lot of things, but one of them is that you can, of course, seamlessly mix images of physically existing things and non-existing things, not just in a sort of post-production state, but as you're working. This technology is used increasingly, of course, in filmmaking, but it was developed for games. Hybrid forms already exist. Hybrid storytelling forms using this already exist in the VR, AR space. And the image is rendered as required in those spaces as I view or engage with or participate in the fiction. So historically, audiovisual storytelling was a lot about selecting specific images, framing specific images, pacing specific images. And none of those things are necessary here. And when you have captured the thing, I mean, you can put the camera anywhere inside your engine once you have built it. So you don't actually physically, you can disconnect entirely the connection between the physical location and the filmmaking process. And this, of course, is technology that is available today and is relatively cheap. But we're not all remembering that. most of the time as we're making things, which is a little bit alarming. But it is also changing the audience's relationship when they interact with this stuff every day in games to what audiovisual storytelling is supposed to do and what it can do. And VR in particular puts in an element of physical presence for me, the physical feedback and the physical interaction, where I, as I move in the world, essentially become the camera. Okay. What is wrong in this picture? Let's see. Oh, no, we have lost the sound. Oh, sorry. You can shout out the answer when you have it.
Here's Johnny.
Who's that? Jim Carrey, yeah. Yeah. So deepfakes are currently used for three purposes: comedy, political misinformation, and non-consensual pornography. Political misinformation, mostly deepfaking men, is getting a lot of attention. Non-consensual deepfake pornography, mostly, obviously, but mostly portraying women, is the majority of deepfake use right now, and is not getting all that much attention. Who owns our likeness? Who owns how I look, the surface of my body? Does becoming a celebrity imply that my likeness is now public property? When I die, who owns my likeness then? Will my family inherit it? Can I sell my face while I'm alive? Does the likeness of Carrie Fisher belong to her daughter, to the estate of Carrie Fisher, or to the late Carrie Fisher, with whom we cannot do a contract anymore? And if Carrie Fisher is used in non-consensual pornography, I'm sure she already is, but if she were, like, whose job it is to take somebody to court if that's what we're supposed to do in that situation? Now, deepfakes offer a lot of creative benefits, obviously. Staging scenes in documentaries about historical people who are no longer around. Of course, we could create footage portraying what we believe has happened in a photorealistic style with the right faces, maybe the right voices. Film restoration could change completely. We could have current talent working with the faces and bodies of previous talent, which sounds absurd until you think about the career of Andy Serkis, who's pretty much just like worked as an animated creature his whole career up until recently. And I mean, deepfakes is not an actor wearing a mask. It's real-time rendering, again, of a pre-existing material. And you do need to simulate the voice, but AI is making that easier as well, and we're probably going to crack it in the next few years. This kind of stuff is technology that's available. Anybody who has some time and some understanding of how this stuff works can already do this. And I think we need to start thinking really fast about the ethical implications. And of course, I mean, the political misinformation stuff is mind-blowingly difficult. We're really bad at remembering that photographs can be manipulated. And the first surviving photograph we have is from 1826. We're terrible at remembering that a video clip from a disaster or a war zone is not necessarily from that disaster or a war zone, or even at all from reality. We mess up, all of us in this room have retweeted things from a crisis somewhere that had pictures that were from some completely different place and time. All of us have done that, I promise you. And that's before you even bring in the deep fake thing. This is already here, so 5 years from now, we will probably, like, our whole relationship, everybody's whole relationship to the truthfulness of the audiovisual image is going to be questioned and changed. We're going to have some kind of watermarking system, probably based on blockchain or something, to know and contextualize what things come from. But how does it change the idea of fiction film? I have no answers, as you can see. I have only questions. But this is all happening around us. And that's, I mean, drama is happening on all kinds of platforms. This is some images from just now, by now, not even new, Instagram drama by Yle in Finland, the podcaster. Young viewers are becoming habituated to to video content or to drama content on the platforms where they're operating. So to them, it's not weird to have Snapchat fiction or Instagram fiction and so on. To me, that's super weird, even though I like to think I'm like hip with the kids. So what I'm saying is, as we're in the trenches of the streaming wars, which I'll talk about a few minutes now, let's not get distracted, because what's going to happen now is that for 3 to 5 years, we're going to be like in a hole where we're just going to produce. We're going to make so much content. You're all going to make so much money. It's going to be great. But there's a real risk that we're going to come out of that when the market contracts again, maybe 5 years from now, and be like, okay, I am the master of the TV drama, or I'm the master of the feature film, and we're in this wonderful creative space. And possibly the reality has changed around us quite a lot. I'm thinking like we call it the streaming wars, like it's an actual war, but maybe it's a little bit like when we are away in the trenches. Meanwhile, society will change, and then we're in the 20s again, as weirdly we are in the 20s again, and now suddenly women and minorities and workers who were also participating in that war, although in this case as viewers, saying, you know what, we also want rights, like society will never be the same again, and we will suddenly be stuck in a conservative position, and we don't like to be conservative because we're artists, we want to be at the cutting edge, so this is really difficult. Guy Bisson from MPA Analysis said on Wednesday at TV Drama Vision, he shared some of their recent stats, and he said that the global investment in content, minus sports rights, which is a whole other conversation, has risen in the last 5 years 30%. And the projected growth in the global investment of content, non-sports, in the next 5 years is another 26%. Which is a suspiciously specific number, but still. 30% growth in the last 5 years, 30% additional growth in the next 5 years. That is crazy, and it's wonderful, and this means we're going to be able to do a lot of things, and we're going to be able to do a lot of more beautiful things and better things, because that's what the real demand is for. It's going to be a wonderful, chaotic time. But there are some limitations. The audience time is a hard limit. 3 hours maybe for living room, 5 hours maybe for video, all in all, across the day. There's also some things that are changing in the technology. This is not going to be all like premium SVOD subscriptions. If you want to like take a deep dive into how we think television is going to work 5 years from now, you can read about that in the report. And everybody kind of agrees that certainly on the sort of streamer side, there are going to have to be some consolidations that are starting pretty soon, and certainly after 5 years, there are going to be fewer global players, and that probably means that there's going to be less, less commissioners means it's less artistic width, range. People do agree that the boom will continue to have a lot of audiovisual production, but we're probably not going to be making as many feature films, for instance, or whatever that word even means 5 years from now. So not everybody gets to be an art house director, but there's going to be plenty of work in video broadly for everyone. So is everything fine and dandy? No. The main problem, as you all know, is the capacity problem. We are essentially now at capacity in this industry. We're making as much as is currently possible. We have a lack of everything from scriptwriters to microphones, and the prices are going up, and their scheduling is a nightmare. I had a panelist last weekend, a film producer, who said where previously she perhaps used 20% of her time on staffing-related issues and could use the rest of her time on creative things. 70% of her time right now is just figuring out staff for the project. And of course, that's going to be reflected in quality. And these problems stagger down the line as well, so it becomes, there are all kinds of escalating problems that follow from that. And certainly, specifically producers, there's a real worry that producers are becoming like a service function for the commissioning side of the industry, and they don't get to have an amount of creative control, certainly not backends and so financial backend and so on. And there's a real worry that this is going to mean that the kind of producers that we have in, for instance, Europe and South America, who have been the guarantor of creative diversity, guarantor for talent development, guarantor for R&D as well in the industry, that their breathing space is going to be even smaller than it has. And let's remember that it's shrunk quite a lot even since 2008. So that's a big concern. One of the good news is that that in this technical infrastructure, whoever understands the audience the best can monetize the interest of the audience. And we have this worry about the giant streamers that they have all the data. They have all the data and they won't give us the data. They won't give us the data. But we also have data. And we have qualitative data. Even every one of you can have qualitative data if you want to. Every one of you can spend time with actual humans. And as we're moving to streaming, the amount of data will be infinite, and having AI tools that do big data analysis is not automatically going to give you the best answers, which we also discuss a little bit. There's a lot of bias built into those systems, and the thing is going to show you some things, but it's also going to obscure some things in the data. So in some ways, as long as if the production creatives ally themselves with the audience, many of the mechanics in this system are actually going to push power back towards the talent, which is fantastic news. However, I'm going to end very soon. I have 2 more slides. So I'm going to say a few more words about diversity and equality before we move on to talk about that some more. And what we say in the report is, yes, everything, like all of the curves are pointing in the right direction. But we also have to remember that first diversity is easy, and then diversity is hard. And the easy part of diversity is this. If you have a prejudiced industry, as we have to admit that we all have had, and still have, there's a lot of women and minority filmmakers, a lot of experience, a lot of talent, who were great, or pretty damn good, or fine, whose careers did not progress as they should have. So now we're standing there above the glass ceiling, like, whoa, where are all these people? Oh, they're down there, and just like making holes for them. Just come, we need you all. And we need you all in this marketplace. So then suddenly it's the we, on the we level, is suddenly looking like everything, which is great. I'd much rather be part of a we that includes everybody than a we that includes just some people. But below that level, below the people whose careers had stalled, there is not a great pipeline pushing diverse talent into this industry, because there are all kinds of complex structural reasons why people don't end up in this industry. And one of the main ones is that to have a career in this industry, you have to be able to work for free, or for essentially free, for quite a long time. And even before that, you have to be able to take the risk of a creative career, which means possibly no income. And most people can't actually afford to take that kind of a risk. That, whether they can or not, is determined very powerfully by who their parents are. And this is a massive problem that we have. So we may have just passed the easy bump in our inclusion work and maybe hitting the hard bump. So it's really important now that we don't give up and that we start to use our intersectional analysis skills on this. What's not working with recruitment? What is not working with our understanding of the audience and the lives of the audiences? And what is not working artistically right now? And part of it is that, I like this. I like this American phrase, this shit will not fly. And you can have it, the shit will not fly, and you can make a little mnemonic for yourself for the next 2 years for how you work. Okay, it means that if you don't do your homework on representation, if you don't do your homework on the stories and the worlds and the communities and the people that the work is portraying, that shit will not fly. Like, the audiences will not accept it. You will be crucified, and that's probably great, because we deserve it, right? But also, the shit will not fly. Because if it's shit, nobody's gonna have time to watch it. So this is an interesting situation, because we have to make the best content, because this market will not allow us to succeed with weak content, which is really interesting. And it's not going to allow us to succeed with low relevance. So now we're going to have to figure out, like, okay, but what are the internalized structures in our organization, and what is the internalized bias in me individually that is stopping me from working with everybody or understanding the communities around me and so on. And the good thing about working with diversity at this particular moment in this particular industry is that it actually is a way of directly addressing a lot of our problems. It broadens recruitment. That is fantastic, because we're in desperate need of talent, and we're in desperate need of stories and situations that we didn't know before. And that other hard limit, which is the time of the audience, we can actually grow that, not by adding hours to the day, because of course we can't do that, but we can add more potential viewers by making our content relevant to other people. So that's actually where growth is. That's the only place, to be clear, where growth is. And also this is an important element in our fight for democracy and for the locally and regionally and sociologically specific experience, which if you're making film with public funding, that's literally what it says in the charter that we're all supposed to do. Also, we should do it because it's right, but also that. But there also the commercial goals are the same. Only when art touches on truth can it become universal and pass through those barriers and pass through our personal bias. Okay, I lied. I have a second last slide still. Yeah, we're looking at the future 3 to 5 years ahead. And that means that at least the last 2 reports are still worth reading. And these are a little bit more bleak, like do or die. And like, how do we stay relevant? And last year, I have been traveling the world talking only about fascism and climate change to the film industry. And I just want to remind you that our house is still on fire. Like, that has not changed. This is like the emergency is still it's still an urgent emergency. Like literally every decision you make, including creative decisions, should be made in the context of these macro trends of the acute climate crisis and the increase of fascism. But the good news is that right now we have this insane window of opportunity. 5 years from now, probably it's going to be over. But right now, we have a moment where we can do the right thing and do the best thing, and do the creatively most important thing, because that's what the market actually wants. So it's a bit of a win-win. The market wants you to aspire to greatness and be your best self. Isn't that amazing? So that's where I'm going to end for now. Thank you very much. This is where you can download the report and send it to all your friends. My contact information, should you need it, is inside the report. And I'm going to say thank you and leave the stage to Jonas and Mirja from the festival. Thank you very much.